Okay. Good evening. We are this evening starting on the syllabus at Roman numeral 5. Okay. This is kosher speech. Okay, how we speak. Roman numeral 4 is the things that go into our mouths. Roman numeral 5 is the things that come out of our mouths, the words we say, and some of the mitzvah that govern how we speak. I think this is really, these mitzvot, these prohibitions and guidelines are not all of them very explicitly described in the Torah, and some of them have been really developed and clarified only in relatively recently in halachic history. But I think they really characterize communities that care about them in a really special way. Right? In other words, communities that speak differently and speak carefully. I think are just more different, okay, than other kinds of communities in a way that I think really that really matters. Okay, so for example, let's just go through these items. So there within the there are I guess like levels of slanderous speech that are forbidden. Okay, there are two levels of slander. One is called motzi shem ra, one is called lashon hara. Motzi shem ra is, I think we'd call maybe classic slander. It's telling a lie about somebody that isn't true. This does have a basis in the Torah. The Torah just described this. And this is I don't think it's not unique among Jews who consider slander to be a grievous offense, but it's also a Torah offense as well to make up lies about other people and to share them. Lashon hara, okay, is a more, is speech that's derogatory and damaging and is also true. And I think it's a little bit less intuitive that such a thing would be forbidden. But I think if you just think about it a little bit, like why would it, it's true what I'm saying. That's not really defense because you're saying something which is derogatory and damaging and that the listener has no need to know. Right? If there's a toilet, if there's a need for the person to know, then it's a mitzvah to say, okay, like if somebody's going to go to a doctor and that doctor is a reckless, incompetent physician, you have to tell someone that to protect them. If someone is dating and the person they're dating is abusive or is mentally unstable or something, right? Like you have to protect protect somebody who might be harmed by and could be protected from harm by the knowledge that you have. So there's an absolute obligation to say information that the recipient has a need for, but information the recipient doesn't have a need for, even if it's true, or especially because it's true, it's just derogatory or harmful, there's just no reason to share that, and it's actually forbidden. And I would say, again, this is something that Jewish communities that have really excelled in this area of mitzvah observance, I think it's just a different kind of environment, right? There's people say, refined people talk about ideas, mediocre people talk about events, and like base people talk about other people. Okay, it's something like if you can avoid talking about other people, you can have more refined and elevated conversations. I think certainly if the things you're saying about other people is derogatory and damaging. I remember very specifically a very clear occasion. I was with friends when I was my first year as a yeshiva student. We were a group of classmates and we were hanging out. We had just met somebody who I guess given a presentation to us, and we were all kind of thought she had said some silly things. We were making fun. I don't know. We were just like saying lashon hara. We were saying derogatory and damaging things about someone else. And one of my classmates said, "Hey guys, let's just stop this. Like this is not the right way we should speak." And we just, "Oh yeah, that's right. Of course it's not." And we just stopped. And I was so like proud of us that in that moment we kind of recognized that this was not how we wanted to be. This is not how we should be, and we just pivoted away from that in a moment. So I don't know. It was really. I thought that was like a very. I don't know. That was very notable to me. It's like that moment has stayed with me. This was like 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago, and it stayed with me. Okay, so that's mostly shem ra is lies, lashon hara is truth. L'toelet, okay, justification. If the recipient has a need to hear the information that you have, then it becomes then it's a mitzvah to share. It's obligatory to share information that someone has to hear. Okay, there's also something called richilut, which is not really damaging and not really derogatory, but it's just there's no reason to say it. It's just sort of gossipy information about other people, which again, it's just best to avoid that, right? Even if it's not harmful, it could become harmful. And there's a concept called avak lashon hara, the dust of lashon hara, which is to say good things about somebody else in a very exaggerated way, or there's no reason for it to be shared because that's going to inspire somebody else to like knock him down a peg. And I feel this, like I get tempted to do this all the time. If somebody is praising somebody, oh, this person, they're so great, they're so wise, I have such a need to be like, nah, they're not so good. Okay, so maybe don't even praise, just don't talk about other people as much. Talk about ideas, talk about let's be careful talking about other people, and limit it to context where there's a value and there's a need for the information that you're sharing. If you just even saying good things can be risky if you're saying it around their enemies or around people who are going to feel the need to again, to like undermine what you say, to just to question the veracity of what you shared about them. Questions, comments so far? Okay, moving on. Okay, bet Sheker and Shalom. Now, the Talmud does tell us, and based on actually, we just had in last week's Torah portion is one of the classic examples, that even though we should tell the truth, the Torah says stay far away from falsehood, we are allowed to lie for the sake of peace. Okay. One question, the Talmud asks this question: how do we praise the bride at a wedding? What do we sing as we're dancing in front of the bride at the wedding? And Hillel says, the bride is beautiful and gracious, and that's how we sing that as we as the bride is there at the wedding. Beit Shammai says, not kala kamochi. You just call it like you see it. Like you say, she has big feet. I don't know, or a small nose. You say what you observe, and you speak the truth. And Beit Hillel is saying, no, there's like a higher truth. Okay, or you should say we lie to protect others' feelings. We lie for the sake of peace. An example of that is when God tells Abraham that his wife Sarah will have a child. Abraham laughs and says, how could that be? For my wife is so old. And then God tells Sarah, you will have a child. And when I told Abraham, he didn't believe it. And he said, how could I have a child? Because I am so old. Okay. Abraham made a comment about Sarah's age. When God relays this conversation to Sarah, he changes that detail and has it be about Abraham's age. Okay, that's an example of Mishanim Mipnei Shalom. Okay, changing what happened, really distorting what happened, lying for the sake of peace. Okay, and that's like that. We learned that from God. There are other examples as well. What's the other example? There's another example in the Torah as well. I can't think of it right now. I think the one Abraham and Sarah is a pretty classic one. And then the Talmud discusses again dancing for the bride, and we follow Beit Hillel, who say that we say kala na'a b'chasuda. Whoever she is, whatever she looks like, we say she's beautiful. Indeed, every bride is beautiful at her wedding, at least in the eyes of the man who's marrying her. So it's not even such a lie, right? In some way, it's true, right? And there's a higher truth. Again, like there's a higher truth that like the peaceful interactions among people that are getting along and not offended and not triggered to have enmity by your straight talk, okay, is a higher truth. Okay, and there's like something even more important than truth, and that is peace. So I think there's like an ethical hierarchy there as well that this is expressing. Okay. Next, letter C, ona'ah. There's a concept of ona'ah, which literally means oppression. There are two kinds of oppression that the Torah prohibits. There's onat mamon and onat dvarim. Onat mamon is oppression, financial oppression, which is defined as a buyer or seller paying or receiving a price for an item that is more than 1/6 the market value. He sort of assumes there is a objective fair market value for every item, which is not necessarily our understanding. Okay, in modern, economics thinking, that there's such a thing as an objective fair market price, like the fair market price is whatever buyer and seller agree upon. But the Talmud assumes there is a fair market price for every item, and if you pay too little, the buyer is oppressing the seller, and if you pay too much, the seller is oppressing the buyer. And actually, the sale can be overturned if it's like a deviation is too great. Okay, so that's onat mamon. Very hard to find that like applications of that again, because I don't know that we have this concept of like fair market price, but it maybe comes up in there's like a it's interesting. Like if somebody is like a Jewish book, Facebook, like a Jewish Facebook book for buying and selling Jewish books. And sometimes people will have people like I have like whatever, I'm downsizing my collection. I want to make room for new books. I'm gonna like just give a stack of books that I have that I don't really want anymore, and I'll offer them for sale. $5, $10, whatever it is, free, pay for shipping. And like in that stack of books, there might be one or two, which is like on eBay, you can't, it's like $150, right? Like there are random books. Like I have books here that like, whatever, they're out of print, like people want them. And it's $150 for that book on eBay. But I don't know that, right? So if I'm selling it for $5 and the purchaser knows that it's like the current rate on eBay is $150, I don't know, there might be something untoward there in that dynamic. It's I mean, as a seller, I could also look at eBay before I offer the book for sale. So it's like, I could find out what the market rate is, but I don't know how much, who does it. So I'm not saying it's a totally irrelevant concept, but it's much less relevant, I think, with our understanding of economics and like what is the objective fair price of an item. Onat Dvarim, that oppression, that causing of pain through speech is quite relevant. The examples in the Talmud are talking to somebody who is a convert, and you don't remind them of their idol worshiping parents or grandparents, right? You talk to somebody whose parent was a highwayman who was hanged, for his crimes. Don't use the word hang. Don't say, look at those fish hanging up for sale at the fish market. Don't use that word. Like that's a triggering word. Okay, it's a very, it's an obligation to be hypersensitive in the language we use, even to the degree of not using words that are perfectly fine, unoffensive, normal words, if that word is going to be triggering for the person you're talking to. Okay, like you have a responsibility in your speech to avoid causing pain to others, even if it's like their fault, not your fault. Okay, it's their fault they have this hypersensitivity about this word. It's not my fault. No, it's your responsibility to avoid pain. In your interaction with other people, and that means not using words that you have a reason to expect are going to be painful words for other people. Okay, it's a very refined ethical standard in our speech and interactions with others to always think of the other person, their history, their background, what's going to be hard for them to hear, etc. Okay. Lifnei Iver. Lifnei Iver is like a category of prohibitions, which is not necessarily speech related, but they can be speech related. They can be violated through speech and also through our actions. This is causing somebody else, or implication, or being complicit in somebody else's sin. Okay, so there are actually like different layers of lifnei, like within this, let's say, broad category of lifnei Iver. Like literally, lifnei Iver means don't put like the Torah says, lifnei Iver lo titen michshol, don't put a stumbling block before the blind, which doesn't mean literally, or doesn't only mean literally putting a stumbling block before a blind person, but it means like somebody's blind regarding some matter, don't cause them to, don't trip them up, okay? Which means don't give somebody bad advice, and which means don't enable someone to sin, which is like a form of giving someone bad advice. That's a stumbling block for the blind. When it comes to this matter, they're blind. You're enabling them to sin. So what are these three layers? So there's mesit. Mesit is the worst. Mesit is somebody who actually encourages somebody else and tempts somebody else to sin. Okay, I think it's pretty obvious why that would be a really bad thing to do. Okay, to tempt somebody to do something wrong. And the classic case in the Torah, mesit is somebody who tempts somebody to worship idols, like very serious, very bad, and again, like very, very extremely negative thing to do, obviously. The next level, I guess that's rare that would occur. So those some, Moshe Feinstein thought that depending on how it was phrased and the context, maybe giving, extending a Shabbos, an invitation to somebody on a Shabbos, if you knew they were going to drive, was a violation of Mesit. You're convincing them, you're tempting them, right? He thought the synagogue shouldn't have compelling youth programming on Shabbat, because in a situation where the parents are going to drive their kids to the shul. I thought that was mesit, right? Because you're enticing them, you're encouraging them to drive. Okay, there are lots of other opinions, and there are, counter arguments, and maybe they would have driven anyway, and just maybe not going someplace else. But like, I think it's sort of a powerful example, this model of just don't encourage other people to sin, even if you think you have good motives. Second level is misayea, which is just assisting, okay, in somebody else's sinful practice. Okay, so someone is doing work on Shabbat, and you're standing there alongside them as they do it, kind of helping them out, or they're using your tools to help you, right? You're sort of complicit through your encouragement or through your involvement in the activity alongside them. That's right. Even if you're not doing it with your own hands, you're still like assisting, involved in the process already enough, sufficiently that you're complicit, and that's also a violation, maybe a rabbinic violation. And then the classic lifnei iver is the stumbling block case. That's when you enable somebody else to sin. So the classic paradigm of that in the Talmud is there are two sides of a river, and there's non-kosher food on this side of the river with you, and there's somebody on the other side of the river who asks you to like pass it from your side of the river to their side of the river. They can't violate this mitzvah without your help. They need you to take the non-kosher food and like put it in a basket and like send it across the river. And if you don't do that, they have no way to violate this mitzvah. So that's the classic lifnei iver. That's the biblical violation of this prohibition of enabling somebody else to sin. If they're on the same side of the river as you and the non-kosher food, and they ask you to hand it to them, so like, I don't know, they could have gotten it anyway. Maybe that would be maybe misayea. Maybe that's that middle category of being complicit because you're assisting, you're involved, you're there with them, but they could have gotten it even without you. Okay, and then again, that third level, that like most severe level, is to like encourage them, to entice them to sin. Okay, those are three levels again. This is very relevant when are interacting with Jews who are not mitzvah observant. Right? We want to be respectful. We want to maintain friendly relationships with all sorts of people in our friendship circle and our family circle. All very important, all very positive. But at some point, you have to be concerned about being complicit, or even worse, actually enabling their own violations of mitzvah. And depending, so I think that's questions of, invitations. Somebody's going to come to you for a Shabbos lunch, and they're going to drive to you. How do you like formulate that invitation so it doesn't run afoul of these concerns? Attending events where you're encouraging sinful behavior, again, you want to you don't want to be self-righteous, and you want to maintain your existing friendships, but you don't want to be in a situation where you're encouraging somebody to sin, or assisting and aiding and complicit in someone else's sin, and certainly not enabling it as well, where they need you to help them out. One grounds for a kind of more lenient way to think about this is to define the parameters of these prohibitions in a more holistic way, right? So, classic case about that would be this is Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, who was a very important rabbi who lived in Yerushalayim. He died in 1995. So he discusses a situation of someone who is visiting a synagogue or visiting a yeshiva, and he wants a glass of water. And if you give him the glass of water, he's going to drink the water without saying a bracha. He's not going to say a blessing before drinking the water. So to eat or drink anything without saying a blessing is a violation. That's a prohibition. So, but you're giving him water. He's going to drink it without saying a blessing. You're enabling him to sin by giving him this water. He's thirsty. You ask him for water. Give him water. Then you're right. It's like a synagogue shouldn't have a kiddush if not everyone's going to say a bracha, because you're putting out food. They're going to eat the food and they're not going to say a bracha. You're enabling them to sin by providing food when they're not going to say a bracha. So Shlomo Zalman Auerbach says, no, you have to look at it holistically. If you were to deny water to a thirsty person, you're going to cause them to think poorly about Judaism and think poorly of the Torah. And in the long run, this is going to it's going to lead them to be more estranged from Torah and mitzvot. And if you give them water, yes, in this instance, they're going to drink the water without saying a blessing, but in aggregate, holistically, looking at the broad passage of time, this relationship is encouraging them to think more highly of Jews who care about Torah and mitzvah. It's going to lead them to care more and have warmer feelings about Torah and mitzvah, and that's actually good for them, even though this drinking of water is going to be bad for them. And the same could be true. Maybe you can think about, extending Shabbat invitations to people who might drive. Maybe that can be understood in this way as well. And in fact, indeed, there are very important modern halachic scholars who say you can extend invitations to people are going to drive in Shabbat, so long as you give them the option not to drive, right? Like if you want to stay over for Shabbos, you can stay over. Like we'll find you a place, we have a spare bedroom, you can stay over if you want. There are others in our community we can put you up with if you want, right? You don't. So as long as there's a real option that they could stay if they want to, then you don't have to necessarily be concerned about how they get to you or how they leave. Okay, and there are scholars who say that as well. I think and both sides of this debate obviously have a lot of validity and have what to commend themselves. Okay, questions, comments, reactions?
Does this drinking water example apply to non-Jewish person? If the non-Jewish person are not required to say blessing before drinking?
I think a non-Jewish person isn't required to say a bracha, blessing, before eating or drinking. So I think that would not be an issue for them. But the case in the Talmud does describe, like, there are things that non-Jews are not allowed to eat also, like Avrim and Achai, right? The limb of a living animal, which is not something that people eat really much nowadays, but it still is, it's a Torah prohibition that for everyone, all human beings are forbidden to eat the limb of a living animal. And so that's one of the cases that the Talmud discusses. Like, you're on two sides of the river, and a Gentile says, hey, can I pass me that limb of a living animal? Like, if you do that, you're enabling them to sin. So whatever that, they have, non-Jews don't have as many mitzvot as Jews do, but it seems that this responsibility of lifnei iver, of not placing a stumbling block before the blind, not enabling someone else to sin, or being complicit in their sin, or enticing them to sin, would apply for Gentiles as well, just for whatever mitzvah they have. It doesn't seem to be about like Jewish responsibility for one another. It seems to be about like just human, like basic human, like basic human decency and like benevolence, like not harming others, right? I think that's something like that. Okay. Hello, Cassandra. Welcome. Okay. So speaking of blessings, let's go to Roman numeral 6. The Torah itself says that there is an obligation to say some sort of blessing after we eat. The Torah says, you shall eat and be full and then bless the Lord your God. And that seems like a biblical obligation to say a bracha after we eat. In the Torah, it's you eat and are full, and then you say the bracha. So the Torah obligation is to say the bracha when you eat enough that makes you full. If you eat enough and you're not full, that's only a rabbinic obligation. There's still an obligation to say a blessing after everything we eat. Again, that's a pretty basic obligation. If we eat bread, there's the full Birkat Hamazon, the full grace after meals, which has 4 paragraphs. And if we eat one of the 7 species of fruit or grain that the land of Israel is praised for in the Torah, we have something called the Bracha Me'en Shalosh, that like long paragraph length blessing, which has the 3 different versions. If it's grain, if it's fruit, if it's wine, that's the blessing for after blessing for these other things. And for anything else is the Borei Nefashot, which is a pretty short blessing, right, for after blessing. So these are all okay. So certainly grace after meals, if you have full meal, is a biblical obligation, it's a rabbinic obligation to say blessings after other foods. Blessing before food is discussed in the Talmud. It seems to be less, it's unclear. The Talmud discusses and debates why and where and how we have to say a bracha before we eat. And it's an interesting discussion in Tractate Bracha, but the conclusion is that, yes, there is an obligation to say bracha before we eat as well. And there's a whole hierarchy of blessings. There's the hamotzi blessing on bread. There's the Borei Pri Hagafen on wine. There's Borei Pri Eitz on fruit. Borei Pri Adama on non-fruit things that grow, right? Borei Pri Eitz is only on things that like grow from branches, okay? Borei Pri Adama is things that any other plant-based food that you're eating that doesn't grow from branches. And Shahakol is the catch-all. That's everything else, okay? Or it could be like processed foods, or meat, cheese, milk, water, other things. Okay, those are the before brachas. Okay, and every food has a bracha before, bracha after. I think if you're in the, I don't know, like as you start to become an observant Jew, like get into that habit of saying brachot before and after is really important. I think saying bracha before we eat is somehow easier for many people. I think because, I don't know, maybe we sort of graze. We don't necessarily have like defined meals with beginning and ends, and so to say an after bracha is a little bit harder, but that's actually in the Talmud, that the after and the Torah explicitly, the after bracha is the more like obvious, significant, important blessing to make. But the before bracha maybe it's easier for many people to like learn and start doing. You can find online all sorts of like resources for what's the bracha for avocados, for cornflakes, for orange juice, for a croissant, for brioche, for for hot dog, right? Like if sushi, right? There are all sorts of interesting, complicated cases where it's not so obvious. What about things that are combinations? Right? Sushi, it depends on what you care. Is it the rice? Is it the fish? What's the essence of what you're eating? And I eat sushi. I think the fish is like my focus, but I think some people it's not always so obvious for them. Maybe you say a different bracha and all the different components of the sushi. I have a few copies left. I'll show you one second. I have this. They're out of print. This is like a little guide to blessing pamphlet that NCSY produced years ago. It's like a little table. You can look up any type of food and it tells you what bracha to make before and what bracha to make afterwards. It has like a 3-page introduction, which sort of tells you overview of the rules. I think this information was all. I think there's like a website now which has all this information. Maybe there's an app you can put in your phone to find out what to eat. But this is kind of neat. If I have 3 copies left, if anyone wants one, you're happy to have it. Okay, I'm happy to give it to you if you want. When you stick it in your pocket or your briefcase, whatever, and carry it around with you, so you can say bracha throughout the day. Okay, I think it's a neat booklet. But again, it's online. There are apps for helping you say figure out which bracha to make and the foods that you eat. You should learn like what the bracha is. If any of you are interested in this conversion with the CRC, they ask a lot of questions about the bracha. Okay, so you should. They emphasize that a lot in their process. So, it's important, like, to be an observant Jew to say bracha, but like they ask a lot of questions about the various things that you might eat. Okay, after eating, before eating, on other benefits, we say bracha as well on things that smell nice and other benefits, things that help that are good. The other bracha we say are other blessings. So Asher Yatzar, that's important. That's the blessing we say after using the toilet, expressing our gratitude that things that are open, things that are closed, and everything is in our bodies inside and out is the way it's supposed to be, right? And if you've ever had a medical condition in which something that's supposed to be open is closed, or something that's supposed to be closed is open, you know that it's not supposed to take for granted. Okay, so it's a bracha that speaks of like the fashioning of humanity with a great wisdom, and that we're expressing our gratitude that everything works well. The shul, we received a little box of little cards with Asher Yatzar, this bracha. You can stick one in your wallet, stick it in your pocket, carry it with you, so every time you use the toilet, you can whip it out and say this bracha, or eventually you'll learn it by heart. It's not that long, but it's important bracha to say. And then other brachot are on like things we observe, phenomenon that we observe in nature, like a beautiful tree, or like if you look in the Sidra, there's a list of phenomenon, which are some of them are quite rare, some of them are more common, that warrant a blessing. I think the point is that you're supposed to go through your day like feeling religious inspiration, and that's supposed to be channeled towards the feelings of inspiration and gratitude and wonder that confront us as we go about our day should be channeled towards expressing thanks to God, and this realm of brachot, these blessings are meant to accomplish that. Okay, let's I think we'll pause here. Questions, comments on this, on anything we've said so far? Okay, so I'll pause here. I'm going to stop recording. How do I do that? Here we go.